Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we have a packed agenda this evening, so I think we'll start as quickly as we can. Um, Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Economy and Housing Policy Committee on Tuesday the 20th of February 2024 from the Walton Suite. The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Batho, Chairperson of the committee. Some housekeeping points before we start. This meeting is recorded, live streamed, and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. Can everyone please ensure mobile phones are on silent? And in the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting? Before I mention the people who are registered, carry on. For those registered to speak this evening, I'll invite you forward when it's time for you to make your contribution. So, turning to the agenda. Item 1, apologies and deputy members. Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So we've got apologies from Councillor Prest, who's been replaced by Councillor Atchell tonight, and Councillor Isaacs, who's been replaced by Councillor Horrell. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And item 2, declarations of interest. Can I ask if there's any members who have declarations to make? Councillor Westwood?
Thank you. A personal interest in that I'm the Cabinet nominee and representative to both Trinity and the Beacon.
Thank you. Councillor
Horrell? Chair, thank you. A personal interest, but non-pecuniary. My husband is a board member of Trinity. Thank you.
Thank you. And moving on to item 3, there are no chair's announcements. Then on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of November 2023. Can I ask members if these are agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. And on item 5, public participation, just to confirm those wishing to speak tonight, on agenda item 6, we have Tony Goldsby on behalf of Trinity Winchester and Tracy Jones on behalf of the Winchester Beacon. Welcome both. Agenda item 8, Councillor Wallace. And then we have had a technical problem with the lift in the building, and unfortunately that's impacted on attendance from Monica Gill, who was due to attend to speak on agenda item 9. However, she has communicated her questions or points she'd like to raise with us, and we'll then read those out at the relevant point. So then moving on now to the actual main part of the agenda, and the first item, item 6, is the accommodation strategy for homeless households. I'd call on Councillor Westwood to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is brought to this committee for information and for comment in response to the increasing levels of homelessness reported across the country, with a reported £1.7 billion a year being spent by councils in England to house people in bed and breakfast and other temporary homes. In addition, Hampshire County Council has announced a spending review to save £132 million to address a predicted budget shortfall. And this impacts some HCC-funded social inclusion services for vulnerable adults throughout the Winchester district and the wider county. This council is committed to preventing and relieving homelessness, ensuring that everyone within the district receives housing advice and appropriate support if they are homeless or at risk of homelessness. It is recognised that Winchester Council cannot prevent homelessness alone, and works in close partnership with statutory, voluntary and charitable organisations to achieve these outcomes, such as those speaking tonight from Trinity and the Beacon. We are fortunate to be in a position where our use of bed and breakfast is low, and we make good use of our own housing stock to manage additional spend. However, we are aware of the trend across the country may result in increased numbers of people presenting homeless in our district, and aware of the likely withdrawal of Hampshire County Council funding. Both will have a significant impact on the current position. This paper looks at the predicted level of homelessness in the district and identifies several options for managing that growth using our temporary accommodation resources and to manage the financial impact on the council. That's my introduction, and I'll hand over to Mrs. Thorburn to go through the detail. Chair, I don't know whether you wanted to take the questions now or after Mrs. Thorburn's more detailed response.
We'll take it after, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. Thank you. Our projection is based on our previous demand and also what we feel our predicted demand would be. So Appendix 2 outlines, if everything remains equal, that what our supply and demand will be until March 2025. If we don't adopt any of the options or explore alternative options, supply outstrips demand quite significantly of about 139 bed spaces. Not only does this have a financial impact on the council, but it also has an impact on those individuals that face homelessness and may have to go into emergency accommodation. You'll see from point 2.8 on the paper that we've tried to anticipate what that cost of emergency accommodation would be. Obviously, we can only sort of have a stab at what we think that may be. An average cost of bed and breakfast is £525 a week in Winchester. And if we base a household having to stay 1 week and all the lack of bed spaces, then that is a minimum cost of the council of just under £80,000. However, if that average stay was to increase, and we've used the figure of 6 weeks because that is set out to us in the suitability accommodation orders, that no family or household or household member who's expectant of children should stay in bed and breakfast for more than 6 weeks. That gross cost could go up to just under £500,000 to the council. So we've looked at options on how we can minimise the gap between supply and demand. And I'll just briefly take you through the options because I appreciate you've had the paper, but I also appreciate it's quite a complicated paper, and we've tried really hard to make sure it flows the best we can. So our baseline really is option 1. If we choose to not do anything, then that minimum cost of bed and breakfast to the council is £75,000. Just to give you an idea, this financial year we've just spent just over £16,000 and we had a budget of £5,000. And the maximum cost could be in the region of £500,000. Option 2 is for the council and the officers to explore the possibility of bringing the management and support of Sussex Street back into our management, or to contract out to a local provider. Sussex Street is currently part of the Hampshire Social Inclusion, but we do own the building, and that does provide us with 13 bed spaces. We also fund £50,000 towards that scheme from the Homeless Prevention Grant. This would not only free up 13 bed spaces, but would also create a throughput of 10. So that would give us an additional 23 bed spaces, which could reduce the demand from 139 down to 116. And that's outlined in Appendix 2, Option 2. Option 3 would be to review and implement a revised version of our current move-on policy for households that we have a full duty to that reside in our temporary accommodation. At the moment, after 9 months, everything else remaining equal, they're given the priority of Band 2. We're looking at the possibility of reducing that to 6 months. And we've done a little bit of data analysis, which isn't in the report, but the average waiting time once they're in Band 2 is 2.5 months. So it could be after 8.5 months they are accommodated into their own accommodation. And interestingly, out of the single households that are being housed, the majority are going into registered providers accommodation and not Winchester, and families are going into Winchester and not registered providers accommodation. So Appendix 2, Option 3, shows that could decrease the gap between supply and demand down to, so we would go from 139 to 107, and also then reducing the cost of bed and breakfast. However, we do appreciate that not everybody is ready to move on after 6 months. Many individuals have some complex needs, or they just need that extra support. So we are looking at maybe recruiting an intensive worker that could be funded from the Homeless Prevention Grant. We've also had a look at the impact of reducing the move on policy, because it means they may be given priority over other households on the register. And you can see from point 214 that it would mean about 44 households who aren't owed the full duty may have to wait a little bit longer on the housing register. However, they're not the households that are facing homelessness or living in temporary accommodation, so their need isn't as imminent. The move on policy with our external providers, such as the Beacon, Trinity, Emmaus House, that doesn't have a time limit. When the providers feel that individuals ready to move on, they contact us and there's an assessment taken place. So we're not looking at changing that. And the resettlement team will continue to support all the individuals and households that are residing under the government resettlement schemes. Option 4 is to support Trinity to convert their 3 bed spaces within their existing building and to support them into 5 modular buildings. This would increase the supply of 8 bed spaces as outlined in option 4. Option 5 is to look at how the Winchester City Council Landlord Services currently lets its sheltered accommodation. In the Hampshire Home Choice Framework, which we are a member of, sheltered accommodation can be allocated to households who are 55 years plus, and this is endorsed by the other 4 partners of Hampshire Home Choice and all our registered providers. And you can see in point 218 it goes into detail of how many lets we've had, and actually some of our sheltered accommodation has been hard to let, and we've had to let it to households outside of the Winchester district who might have a connection to the other 4 authorities within Hampshire Home Choice. Any individual that is considered for social housing would still go through the rigorous reallocation assessment to see that they're suitable for that property. I think it's really important to note that we have quite a few individuals that are 55 to 59 where their only need is homelessness, and they're taking up much needed beds in our current TA where they could otherwise be considered for sheltered accommodation. We do acknowledge that not everybody is suitable for sheltered accommodation, and those tests would be done by the prospective landlord. And as you can see in 2.19 and option 5 on appendix 2, how many bed spaces that would free up. Option 6 is to bring back into use 17 East Acre for shared temporary accommodation for single households on the Homes for Ukraine scheme, the Ukraine Family Scheme. But as of this week, the Ukraine Family Scheme has ceased now, and therefore everybody will be on the Homes for Ukraine scheme. The paper then goes on to explain from 2.22 if we were to adopt all of those options, how many bed spaces that would free up and also the money saved. You don't have to adopt all the options for them to work. So you could adopt 2 out of the 6 or 3 out of the 6 that they're for consideration. So the next steps for the council are to respond to the Hampshire County Council consultation regarding the proposed cuts to our social inclusion budget, to develop an action plan to implement the suggested the outline changes in the report. If options are agreed, to review and amend the Hampshire Home Choice Move On policy for households who are owed the main housing duty. We're also looking at devising and implementing a policy for households to contribute towards the cost of their emergency accommodation. The council has a duty to secure emergency accommodation, but not necessarily pay for it. At the moment, we don't ask the residents to make any contribution. However, if they're in their own household, they would have rent and bills to pay. So it's not uncommon to have a policy. So we will be exploring with our neighbours authorities about how we take that forward. And then also to consult with our stakeholders and residents, which will also form a part of our wider consultation programme that we have, because we're also due this year for the Preventing Homelessness and Rough Sleepers strategy and the Older Persons Accommodation strategy. And finally, to consult with the Housing Landlord Services at Winchester City Council and the tenants of Winchester City Council regarding the proposed changes to the allocation policy of sheltered accommodation. The aim is to report back to Housing Cabinet on the 5th of November this year with a full accommodation strategy, and within that strategy would be pathways on how we deal with different cohorts when they're faced with homelessness and how we need to prevent and relieve that homelessness. And I'm not going to go into detail, but 4.1, 4.2 and 4.3 outline the options that we've considered and rejected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. That's a great sort of overview of what you're bringing forward to the committee this evening. Before we ask members to ask questions of... Yes. I'd just like to ask our public speakers. So we have one from Trinity and one from the Beacon. So if I could ask Tony Goldsby to come forward, and from the Trinity. Thank you. The process is you've got 3 minutes. There'll be a timer on the screen, which will give you an indication as to how much time you've actually then got remaining. So thank you very much for coming along.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you for having me here this evening. Really appreciate the ability to speak on behalf of all charities in Winchester and Trinity. My name is Tony Goldsby. I'm a trustee. Effectively, we're just sad to see the close of Westview and Sussex Street. It's disappointing, and I think there will be a knock-on effect on local charities, but I think we're willing to take the challenge with that. Support Karen and her options that she presented. And with Karen, we're taking proactive steps to mitigate the loss of Westview and Sussex Street. Trinity hopes to expand with additional quality housing with wraparound support in its place. And we think support is key in providing successful housing provision, which helps with recovery and can also minimize disruption to the community. The Lane House, which is one of our projects, is a successful example of this, with housing and successful wraparound support. Charities like Trinity will need funding and government support ongoing to prevent further homelessness and absorb the loss of Westview and Sussex Street. And it would be prudent to have an integrated approach with local charities, shelter workers, and WCC going forward to be a real catalyst of change. So one of our projects is Project Kanga, and basically this is 3 emergency overnight rooms in our existing day center, and we submitted a planning application for that about 2 weeks ago. And we're hoping through PD that will be granted, but that would, provide immediate relief to the things that Karen spoke of. And we are sourcing funding for that at the moment, and that's something that is in action, which is great. Further, we're looking at 5 additional rooms in Winchester, but this requires a donation of land. And we're actively working with WCC and Hampshire County Council, along with Simon Hendy's support and others, to move these options forward. I think finally, with the interesting thing about the 3 emergency overnight rooms that we described before, these are for support for domestic abuse and for people who would fall in the gap of traditional refuge housing. And the Project Kanga itself would then allow us to apply for future funding for domestic abuse and supportive wraparound services. But that's the holistic view about this, with support services and providing the rooms, and they're key. And with your support, we can keep going. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments this evening, and the support that you give to Winchester and its district in terms of the service you're assisting us with. Thank you. I'd like to now ask Tracy Jones from the Beacon to come forward, and likewise you have 3 minutes to present to the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for allowing me to address the council. My name, as said, is Tracy Jones. I'm representing the Winchester Beacon. I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees. We're a charity similar to Trinity. We currently provide accommodation and support for 22 people every night in the local area, the majority of whom have a connection with Winchester. And we work in close partnership with the City Council and other agencies, and we've done so over many years. We very much support the approach of the housing team and the work that they undertake with the limited resources that they have to assist those with increasingly complicated needs. The proposed spending review with Hampshire County Council will have an adverse impact, as you rightly recognised, and they build upon the cuts that have been made in previous years, really over the last 10 years or more. So it's not a single slash. The proposed cuts will have a very detrimental impact. We've already mentioned Sussex Street and Westview. Those experiencing homelessness generally have multiple needs. In recent months, the Beacon has appointed a resettlement coach to assist our residents to move on and to encourage tenancy sustainment to prevent them from returning to the streets. And that's been a recognised need. We believe a high level of support reduces a repeat and a return to the streets. And we also believe smaller units are easier to manage and it creates less local impact and less adverse sort of antisocial behaviour. We're planning to provide another 4 beds and associated support during the course of this year. And we're doing this without additional support from the City Council. And with the prospect of losing funding in 2025, this will make continuing local provision very challenging, in addition to the areas that have already been identified in your reports. As a charity, we receive a lot of support from our volunteer base, and that reduces the cost both to us and to the council. We're very grateful you're exploring the impact of the spending review, and we believe that there are a number of options that can be explored, not just those you've outlined in the papers this evening, but also taking perhaps a more integrated approach from all of the potential support that's available. And we obviously welcome the opportunity to help you during that consultation period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. And just like to, at this point, acknowledge the work that Beacon, Trinity and Emmaus do in supporting Winchester City Council, because without you and the volunteers that you bring to assisting with the homelessness and the temporary accommodation situations within the city, I don't feel we'd actually be able to have as good a response as hopefully we'll be seeing from the team and the questioning tonight. So thank you both for coming along and your continued support, both in terms of tonight and also through the consultation period. So thank you very much. And just before we move on to questions, sorry, members, we will get into asking questions. I'd just like to acknowledge that we did have 2 further representations this evening, but unfortunately they were unable to be brought in person. We had a petition from residents in the neighbourhood of Milford House, and that has been received by the officer team, and we will be responding and working with those residents during the consultation, and indeed as part of the process the paper will come back to committees, and there'll be an opportunity for questions to be asked at that point. We also, on behalf of TACT, had a letter from Terry Butler, and unfortunately, due to the situation, I think with the lifts, sorry, I'm getting that wrong. Okay, sorry, that was a neighbour in Milton House, so my apologies. I got my wires crossed on that one. So with those acknowledgements, I'd like to now open the floor to the members and ask if there are any questions of either Councillor Westwood or the officer team. Thank you. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have a slight concern about the additional member of staff. It's quite intensive and draining and multifaceted work. And I would not want 1 member of staff to be under that sort of pressure. What potential exists for sharing these responsibilities to and to increase the resilience of the service, in fact, to ease the burden on a member of staff?
Thank you, Councillor Power. That's a really good question. And if we go ahead and adopt that option, we would need to see how that post fitted in within our existing structure, and in consultation with management team, whether that post would be best fit with, say, for example, in the temporary accommodation team, where we already have our outreach worker, so where they could share those roles and responsibilities. But it's also about making sure we have the right supervision in place to support that team member, not just one-to-ones, but clinical supervision, so they can talk to somebody, reflective practice, trauma-informed training. And we would really most probably have to monitor that as it went along, because it may be that one individual isn't enough, but we also have to balance that with the financial resources that we have available to us to employ that member of staff. But they are the discussions that we would have going forward throughout the consultation period. Thank you.
I do have two other, Chairman, if I may, at this moment. If I may, or would
Yes.
you like me to come back?
Actually, could I move on to Councillor Atwell?
Absolutely.
And yes, I'll put those. Councillor Atwell.
Thank you, Chair. The Trinity and Beacon really are exemplar. They have done such a fantastic job here in Winchester district. And as Chair said, we wouldn't be able to do much really without them. I've seen them working closely. My question really on the report for the officer is of clarification, I would say. You list out the number of TA accommodations available today as they stand, and I think probably when I counted it's about 188 bed spaces available. At any time, any particular time, what's the kind of occupancy you normally see? 80%, 90% or full?
Thank you. That varies, so it's really hard to answer because it's very much based on need. So there will be times when there isn't any capacity and we do have to use emergency accommodation until we can get some throughput to free the accommodation up. And there are times when we may have a few voids, but I would say on the whole, it's usually full up, all our accommodation. And even if we adopt all these options, and our predicted demand stays the same as supply, we're still 24 bed spaces short. So it's really hard to answer, sorry, because we could have, the need could increase next week or it could go down. Homelessness is such a moving feast. It's very hard to predict. Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you. And thank you to the team for an excellent paper. You really sort of made us all think about what we're doing and how we tackle the future given the changing circumstances. And I just want to reiterate our thanks to all of our partner charities and agencies, because without all of you, we would not have the service that we can already provide in the district. So thank you for all that you do. I'm assuming as we go through the next few months, we'll look at all of these options, all of which I think have some real merit. Some I think are more attractive than others, but all of them worthy of consideration. And I hope this committee tonight will keep all of them, all those plates spinning for the moment to understand what they can bring. There are obviously costs to some of them, so we need to understand what that might be. And also how we might integrate more. I'm sitting with Tracy slightly in the sense that I think there are more options and more opportunities. Mrs. Knight and I gave some money to Emmaus many years ago when I was a portfolio holder. They added new accommodation. Are there other organisations that we should be reaching out to in that broader area? The Beacon already have move on accommodation. Again, I admire Trinity's initiative tonight, but maybe there are others who can help in this overall development. St John's are not on the list. They provide accommodation primarily for a particular cohort, but what can they offer to us and how can they help? All things that I think all of us ought to be considering, and again, working collectively, because I know we're all committed to the same overall aim here. The one point of clarification maybe the officers can help me with is really the point about the wraparound services. The roof over the head is one thing, but actually for some of these individuals, it's about the services that we can provide that help them on that journey to hopefully find themselves able to sustain a tenancy in due course. And those wraparound services and all that goes with that, you mentioned one role this evening, but I'm sure with the demise of Westview, for example, more will be required. So just want to understand that element. We're talking about bed spaces, but it's not just the bed, it's about all those other things that we do to support those individuals in our care. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Just to your first point about consultation, we are also this year drafting the new Preventing Homelessness and Rough Sleeping strategy, because that, believe it or not, expires this year. And so Charlotte is going to be arranging a homelessness forum for May of this year, to which will be a wider partnership meeting. And I'm really hoping, and the team are really hoping, that people do have options, because we're not going to sit here and say that we have all the answers and all the options. So absolutely to partnership working, and we welcome any options to explore. Wraparound services, again, a really good question. We do now have Housing First. That's successfully, and I have to give the credit to Charlotte. Charlotte worked very hard on getting Housing First off the ground. A2 provide that service with a worker, and we are hoping, and well, say we will be providing 7 homes to 7 individuals who are maybe most entrenched rough sleepers, complex needs. So that will be one of our options going forward. The Ukrainian team are now the resettlement team, so they now will be supporting all individuals on all the government resettlement schemes, and we have been speaking with Mr. Hendy about how we may expand that team. And we also have our outreach worker now in post, based within the TA team, and we have just recruited another full-time TA worker, Emma Barfield, to join our TA team. However, I can't necessarily sit here and say that's going to be enough support. As we go through the next few months, and we know through the consultation, we understand the needs of the individuals, we do deeper dives into our data, then it may be that we have to come back to Cabinet Housing or to EHP and say, actually, we need this resource or we need that resource. But we have to also balance that against our financial situation, which is in Appendix 1, in that our homeless prevention grant is due to reduce next year. We lose our Rough Sleepers Initiative funding next year, and if the Hampshire County Council spending review goes ahead, we also lose that funding. So it's balancing all those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. Further to that point about on the wraparound services, which we know is so key to a successful and enduring settlement, is there any way of quantifying the impact of the reduction in funding, essentially, to those wraparound services? Councillor Horrell made the point very, very ably, and I always, I always like a number, Karen. I like to assess the number of failures we have in resettlement. Perhaps if you could cover that off for me. And my second question is about the sale of Barnes House. There are considerable capital costs arising from all of these options, and I'm thinking you're going to be selecting a potpourri of those options to see which ones floats. Are the proceeds of Barnes House likely to fund those capital costs necessary to bring forward the other options? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm being nodded at to answer the last question around Barnes House. Barnes House is held in the housing revenue account, so no, if Barnes House is eventually disposed of, then the capital receipt from that will go back into the housing revenue account to provide services to the council's tenants when providing a homelessness service. Those services are provided out of the council's general fund budget.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy. In relation to resettlement and it not working for some individuals, that is hard to answer, and part of the going forward will be doing a deep dive into the data of our residents in that accommodation. I mean, I can give you just an example of, so for example, we've done a dive into the data of Milford House, for example, that has support, and in the last 2 years we referred 86 individuals, to which 76 individuals were accepted. Maybe the needs of the other individuals were too high, and out of that only 5 failed. So and I have, without going into much detail, people moved on to social housing, they may have moved on to alternative TA because that provide better support, they've gone to into private sector housing, some were recalled to prison. So yes, you could, that is always a risk. So it is very hard, but part of the strategy for preventing homelessness, and this strategy will be doing a deep dive and looking at repeat homelessness, and then looking at how we can tailor that support, because it wouldn't be beneficial to tailor support to where it's not needed. Yeah.
Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair. And please don't take my question as meaning that I'm not in favour of it being investigated, but how can we ensure that residents who are currently on the waiting list, if we change the rules and some of them feel, you know, quite reasonable, they 9 to 6 months, or age limits to align with other approaches, all of these elements that may change someone's position, as it were, in the queue, that they don't feel they've sort of been overlooked, and that actually they're going to be somehow significantly disadvantaged. So, as I say, I'm not against reviewing all of those elements, just trying to understand how we would manage quite a delicate conversation with those already sort of registered and of a view in terms of their own need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Yes, so I'm just trying to find the point in the report where we had the statistics for that. Some of our accommodation is going to people outside of the district of Winchester because we're not being successful with our own residents bidding on that for various reasons. And I don't think we can have a situation where we've got families in bed and breakfast who don't have any, or individuals, but we're letting our accommodation to individuals. I mean, some may have a connection through work, but a handful don't have a connection. So we also have to meet housing need. And whilst I understand those on the register may be frustrated that people may be housed before them, people may be adequately housed, but they were in a housing need because they live with their parents, or they're in an assured short hold, but it's affordable, but it just doesn't have the security of tenure. And those are the difficult conversations that the service have to have, because we have to manage expectations. And I do understand if we change the policy that there will be people that wait slightly longer. However, if we look at reducing the age for sheltered housing, for example, and people who can only bid on general needs at the moment are able to bid on sheltered housing, that frees up some general needs accommodation for those that are under 55. So there will unfortunately be people that do have to wait longer, but for us, it's about meeting those in greatest housing need. So it is about managing expectations. It is about having difficult conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? One final one, Councillor Horrell.
Sorry, Chair, it's a really important piece of work. Just to clarify, so we're all on the same page, the sort of financial implications have come up, and particularly once we understand the full implications of the county's consultation and the impact that that may bring. In terms of any reserves that we have sat potentially available to fill any short-term gaps, obviously some of these options we could implement pretty quickly based on what you've said here today. Some may be longer term. Certainly if we're building, that may take a bit longer for some, even projects that are not even dreamt of right now. So just trying to understand, we're not quite down at heel yet in terms of money, and what our sort of reserve pot is to help us bridge into this new sort of era and the other options that we'll have to bring to bear. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Appendix 1 outlines our financial forecast. This is the forecast of the grants we receive and doesn't involve any funding through the general fund. We can't commit to all the services outlined in Appendix 1 just with the grants that we receive for the government. So we already are relying on our reserve to fund what we currently fund. And you'll note from the introduction that we do fund some of the social inclusion cuts that happened last year to the Beacon. We have increased our general fund to help with the pressures on bed and breakfast from 5,000 to 25,000, which I understand was agreed at Cabinet and Council last week. If we were to take on any new initiatives that aren't outlined in Appendix 1, our reserve would go down even more quickly. And as you can see, by 26, 27, we're only left, I say only, but with just over £100,000. We are still waiting the notification from the government of how much of the 120 million we're going to receive that was announced before Christmas. We still don't know, but that's 120 million across all the authorities. So discussions I've had with Charlotte, we don't think it's going to be huge, but obviously very greatly received. But again, against all these decisions options, we also have to be mindful of our finances. Thank you.
Thank you. And just ask Simon here to make a comment in terms of the budget that's going forward to the full council. Sorry, do you want to say something instead, Councillor Westwood?
Just before we move to Mr. Andy, so just to comment on the last question there, I mean, in my introduction, I did say that this is a significant problem across the UK, and the government does need to address it in one way, shape or form. So this is the position with the funding at the moment. Clearly some funding is being withdrawn. I mean, I would at some stage anticipate more funding being moved into this particular problem from a national level. So, you know, we do have to take that into account as well. And there is liable to be a change of government in the next 9 months. And that will also alter the position. So we have to picture that. We're not putting it in the paper, but we're aware that there is a bigger issue that needs to be dealt with than this council has for many other authorities.
Thank you, Chair. Members are probably aware the council this week will be considering the general fund budget for 24-25, and included in that is a proposal to increase funding to the homelessness reserve by £20,000 a year. So that includes, obviously at this point in time, it's been set out in the report, it's very difficult for us to adequately sort of crystal ball in terms of the increased demand that will be presented, but it's a way to address some of the funding issues going forward.
Thank you for that. Any further questions, members? I think we've already had sufficient, so I'll ask us to move into debate, please. Any people would like to?
Thank you, Chair. And I did have a question, but it was answered as part of the very detailed overview. So thank you for that. So I guess the observation is the report pictures this as a series of options, whereas in reality, I think it is more a set of tasks that can be undertaken in parallel. So I think that my personal observation is, given that the welfare concerns that clearly sit alongside this, we should be being bold. And in going forward, therefore, the conversation should be, what combination of options is it that gives us actually the best outcome in addressing the shortfall, and sitting alongside that, as you've already mentioned several times, so clearly have already highlighted then that the financials that then sit behind that as well. And I almost hesitate to mention it because it nearly is secondary under the welfare concern, but clearly there's a sub-thread, I think, of a spend to save type argument that sits alongside it as well. And I'll just encourage us to monitor that as we go forward, because I suspect it's a combination of the options rather than any individual. That's the right answer for us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further? Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the breadth of opportunities that you've shared today. And it's clear that we understand now where our accommodation physically sits and what we have available, but also those other elements that we have to provide to ensure the well-being of the cohort that we're addressing here. And clearly, when we get into this, there will be some variables here. Some are more costly in terms of implementation than others, although there's a similar element in terms of the savings to the council on bed and breakfast per head of or per bed space available. Chair, I hope that one thing we can take from tonight is that sort of partnership working as many who are in the room tonight and more to come together to see what else we could do. We already have a great spirit in the district to work together around this important area, and I think there are probably more things we could bring to bear. And we should be supporting the likes of the Beacon and Trinity in their fundraising efforts to deliver some of these options for us. So, Chair, I hope that we can all get behind this and encourage the officer team over the coming months to refine this and then come back, obviously, to Cabinet Housing later in the year. Thank you, Chair.
Stashwell.
Thank you, Chair. The report directly supports our council's plan of delivering homes for all, and that's really a fantastic background we got here. The report has explored 6 options, and probably there'll be a couple more that will come up again. Altogether, all in combination of them, I think we should be able to manage the situation. We should not be facing this at all, really, under the circumstances, but there we are. We have a problem. We have a possible solution. I really congratulate the officers for putting together this good report and coming up with nice answers, possible answers. Thank you.
Anything further? Okay, so I think we'll just go back to the recommendations that the policy committee reviews and provides comments on the options available to address predicted homelessness demand, and that they will be subject to consultation before agreement at Cabinet Committee Housing. So I think we've done that successfully. So I'd just like to reflect on the comments that have been made and the points that have been made. That obviously this is a increasing problem, has been, and with budgets being cut by Hampshire County Council over many years now, this is not a problem that has been only occurred recently. It's something that's obviously been evolving over the years that those cuts are being made. All I can say is that from the presentation this evening and the support that we've seen from both Trinity and the Beacon, that the team and those at Winchester City Council that will be providing us with our services around this area are doing a fantastic job, and I commend them to continue the work and bring the further reports back to this meeting. So thank you very much for doing that. Thank you. So we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 7. This is the Winchester District Cultural Strategy, and I call Councillor Thompson to introduce the team that will be presenting it. Thank you very much. So just before that, obviously those that came from both Trinity and the Beacon, you're very welcome to stay. There are obviously another paper later in the meeting which has a relevance to homelessness, but if not, then thank you very much for your presence this evening. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chair. We're going to have a very exciting presentation, which Emmeline and Andrew are going to lead on. But just before we get to that, I'd just like to, well, I don't know whether you want to put the first slide up. How are we doing? How are we doing? Yeah. It's all right. Right, hooray. Thank you. Could we just have the next slide, please? Okay, I'll just talk a little bit about the purpose of the strategy. It was one of the key strands of work that was identified in the Winchester District Green Economic Development Strategy, which we were talking about later, to identify a new cultural strategy to provide an overarching, coordinated vision to ensure the district develops, promotes and celebrates its cultural offering. And this presentation you're going to see will really highlight our journey on this new piece of work, where we started, which was just a year ago, right through to the conclusion. It's been a huge amount of work, all ably led by our officer, Emmeline Hickman. And before I go on to say any more, I'd just like to thank Emmeline for the way in which she has brought together so many diverse organisations and individuals across our district. And this presentation will give you a flavour of the collaboration that's taken place with those organisations, not only informing the vision, but also setting out the key priorities. And they are education and young people, placemaking, economy and creative industries, and events and festivals. And of course, it was also Emmeline who was the architect of such an interesting and interactive members briefing, which is still talked about actually, really raising the bar considerably on what we usually come to expect from a members briefing. So I'm really pleased to sit here and introduce this because, as I say, it's been an enormous amount of work. We've brought together a really collaborative, a really fantastic collaborative team going forward. And I think we can really build on that and ensure that we have something to work on as a team, not just as the council, but as the wider cultural community. So I think with that introduction, we can go into the main slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. If we go on to the next slide after that, please. So following on from what Councillor's introduction was in connection with partnership, there's been over the last year a lot of work has been spent working with the cultural and creative sector as we have developed this strategy, and partnership has been an absolute golden thread and key throughout that. And that has been very important because we all recognise the fragility of the cultural and the creative sector. And so the ability to develop a robust and resilient partnership is really important for us to ensure that we, along with the sector, can actually bring together this strategy and then deliver the outputs and outcomes of it. So this slide very much tells us the sorts of businesses and organisations and representative bodies that we have been working with across this year. And have developed a stakeholder group that we have worked with very closely in developing the strategy that eventually will come before Cabinet on March the 14th. And we are a partner, and very much a partner with this group of stakeholders. And together and collectively, that group have developed the values, the vision, the aims and the objectives of the strategy and the actual action plan. And as you can see from the organisation's representative, we believe that we've brought together a broad cross section of the cultural sector, both in terms of the sector, but also geographically across the districts as well, which was clearly important. If we go to the next slide. And then in terms of process, as we mentioned just now, this piece of work is born out of the Green Economic Development Strategy and an action plan in the action plan that has just coming to an end. And we have brought papers in front of the Business and Housing Policy previously, scoping out what this strategy would look like, and the committee have had opportunity to input into that, and also the early findings of the evidence base from which a lot of the objectives and a lot of the action plans have been developed. As we say here, this is very evidence-based. The slide there explains the level of engagement and the depth and breadth of engagement that we have undertaken across the last year. We mentioned about the stakeholder group that we've been working very closely with, but we've also worked very closely with actual practitioners within the sector in terms of sector workshops and wider workshops, one-to-one interviews, presentations. We mentioned, Councillor mentioned earlier, the members' briefing as well. So both practitioners, representative bodies and councillors have had opportunity to input, but also most importantly, as have the residents. So we've been running a resident survey for a number of months about the needs, desires, the wants of our residents in terms of cultural and creative offer for the district, and also with our visitors to the district as well. And this has obviously influenced and informed a lot of the planned actions coming forward. Then the group collectively felt that it was very important that we developed a set of overarching values that would underpin the work coming forward over the next 5 or 6 years. And there are some sort of very key important points here. The group were very keen that the strategy was distinctive, that it very much had a Winchester district feel to it, that it was particularly pertinent to Winchester and the district specifically. So this wasn't any sort of general cultural and creative strategy. We've mentioned about collaboration and how important that has been, and that continues to be a focus around the development of the strategy going forward. Inclusivity has very much also been a key priority, and resilience. And when we mention about resilience, the partnership activity helps to support that, but also financial resilience as well is also a key part of the strategy coming forward that you'll hear about in a moment. But also being ambitious, with a realistic element to it as well. The group felt was very important and also supported by us as officers. And so that finally led to the vision that's been put forward for the district. So for the district, creative dynamism enriches lives and makes amazing things happen. And that will be sort of the mantra that will be held against the strategy and will be the focus of all the activities going forward over the years to come. And then actually in terms of how that actually breaks down, we developed a series of themes and priorities that were collaboratively agreed upon. So 4 priorities that they are vertical priorities through the actual strategy itself. So education and young people, placemaking, economy and creative industries, and events and festivals. And then through cross-cutting through all of those 4 are cross-cutting themes of inclusion and diversity, environmental responsibility, and health and well-being. So they will feature in all of those 4 key pillars. And as that diagram shows, all of that activity and that delivery is wrapped up in this partnership working. And as we move forward through this presentation and towards the end, you'll hear a little bit about the actions, etc. And these actions are very much delivered, potentially going to be delivered by a number of stakeholders, one of which is us. But I'll hand over to Emmeline now, who will take us through the actual themes and priorities in a little bit more depth.
Thank you. So each slide will just kind of go through why this particular thing has been chosen as a priority and what the change we would like to see within this particular area is. Education and young people was selected because there are young people in the district who will not have the opportunity to engage in culture through their everyday lives, or increasingly through mainstream education as funding cuts are happening, and 30% of Winchester district residents are under 25. Therefore, they represent quite a large proportion of our population. It's also important to recognise that cultural education is enriching beyond the activity itself, so it improves things like confidence, coordination, teamwork and well-being. So by 2030, we would look to have established a youth-led movement, which is designed to encourage a growing number of young people to discover and engage in a wide range of cultural activities. Supported by multiple partners, this will be accessible, inclusive, diverse and safe space for young people to celebrate themselves and embrace their creative talent. And then our next priority is placemaking. So it's widely acknowledged that culture and heritage can be transformational for a place. It's about bringing people together and have opportunities to share and have shared experiences. There is an opportunity to use the place as a canvas for this and increase the conversations and grow from the community themselves. Celebrate and bring to the fore the uniqueness of Winchester. So what does placemaking mean to Winchester as a district? So the change we would like to see is harnessing our collective power to influence and bring about some of that change in terms of civic pride and sense of community, showcasing and connecting these communities to our diverse offer. And this also then brings us to attracting external investment and culture being considered a key part of Winchester's identity. And then that can start to bring culture to the fore in terms of regeneration and growth and investment towards the latter part of the strategy. Events and festivals. Lots of people said that is a platform to explore culture and community in a diverse and inclusive way beyond a big building that people might not want to walk into. And we already host approximately 30 events and festivals each year, and they celebrate a wide range of things from outdoor arts, heritage, theatre, food and drink, poetry, books, fashion, sport. And these opportunities for people to come together and share these experiences are really important for that sense of community and civic pride. Therefore, by 2030, working again in partnership, we'll have a growing number of festivals and events covering a really wide range of themes and topics, which will be attracting new and existing audiences and prioritising inclusion and accessibility. Whilst we want to maintain the quality that Winchester is already known for, we want to also encourage inspiring, experimental, risk-taking and fun activity, whilst having a creative and strategic overview. Then our next one is the economy and creative industries. So the creative industries play a crucial role in the economy of Winchester District, contributing 283 million GVA in 2019 and employing almost 5,000 people in 2021. The creative industries harness imagination, entrepreneurship and innovation, generating growth even in trickier times we've seen more recently. The workforce is bolstered by the universities and our proximity to London and is projected to continue growing. Therefore, by 2030, we will do a better job of celebrating this. It might be a little bit unknown that we're that good. So we're going to devise some plans and some innovative solutions to some of the challenges and maximise those opportunities, looking to create a network of spaces and skills to support those younger career aspirations and demonstrate that economic benefit in a better way.
And then just continuing on the theme of partnership working, and just to sort of re-clarify the importance and relevance of this, the stakeholders felt that that was very much the key to future success. And as we say in this slide here, this is about to look at resilience to avoid the issues around a single point of failure, but also very importantly to share experiences, share knowledge, share resources and share networks to ensure that the group and the strategy has best chances to be delivered and for the cultural and creative sector to continue to flourish and grow. And so by 2030, the group and the strategy would like to see that a far stronger influence and power on increased sustainability, the opportunity for anchoring additional funding and support, and allowing the space for some creative risk-taking and some innovative thinking. And alongside our existing audiences to be bringing festivals and events, cultural and creative opportunities that sees a more wider, more diverse set of audiences, and workforce will be supported with additional outcomes in such areas such as health, well-being and environment.
which takes us on to the first of our themes. So once again, these themes sort of run through everything. So they're not standalone activity, they're things that we're thinking about within the other priorities we've already mentioned. So the first one is around environmental responsibility. We know that there is a climate emergency and a nature emergency, and we're also well aware of how much of Winchester District is rural and how we need to protect those spaces. And actually about the benefits that the environment bring as well. People going out into the green space is beautiful, and how can we capitalise on that and use that for cultural experiences. So by 2030, we will ensure that environmental responsibility is a first thought as opposed to an afterthought. And initiatives delivered through this strategy will have an awareness of the environment. And we would also like to use culture as a tool to have those conversations about the environment as well. So health and well-being is our second theme, and the positive role that culture and creativity can play within health and well-being is undeniable, seen in the pandemic increasingly when people were turning to art in their bedrooms and all those sorts of things to cope with being locked down. And you know, we strongly believe that access to this activity will lead to happier and healthier people. So by 2030, culture and creativity will have made a demonstrable difference to the health and well-being of Winchester Residents District. We'll seek to champion that role, a fundamental role, and throughout the delivery and implementation of the strategy. And our third theme is inclusion and diversity. We are well aware of the increased diversity, broadening perspectives and bringing new things to light. There is an argument that, you know, Winchester is predominantly white, in very good health, physically able and heterosexual. And sometimes this is reflected within our cultural programming. So that is something that requires a sustained effort to actually address and actively work upon. Therefore, by 2030, a greater proportion of the cultural and creative workforce and audiences will be from more diverse backgrounds, and programming will more accurately reflect that. And again, we have to actively pursue that to encourage people to consume, engage, participate, lead, produce, and have careers in culture.
And then in terms of investment, as we highlighted at the top of this presentation, the fragility of the cultural and the creative sector, and that sits squarely in terms of financial and funding fragility as well. So it was only absolutely right that this has its own dedicated key strand in the strategy in terms of how we can future-proof the sector and what we do around our cultural and creative provision in terms of investment and financial support collectively across the sector as a whole. And so there were a number of ideas and thoughts coming forward from the stakeholder group that we've reflected here in the slide, how collectively the group and the sector could work together, and some of those are highlighted there. So opportunities to put together joint applications, ways in which we can work collectively more effectively with the corporate sector and corporate partners, and how funding opportunities might come about there. Making sure that we raise our head above the parapet and make sure people realise what we're doing within the Winchester District in terms of our culture and creative sector, and what that might bring about in terms of interest from others for funding and financial opportunities. Looking at ways in which we can diversify the income as well, and some particular tactical suggestions were coming forward about the possibility of, for example, the 100 Club, where a number of 100 organisations put forward a specified donation for actual output and activity, and there've been sort of many more ideas coming forward in terms of investment as the action plan continues to evolve and develop going forward. And then the next slide, just to sort of reiterate the complexity and the broadness of the cultural and creative sector and the impact that it has and its connections across a whole wide area that we all work within. This slide aims to sort of confirm and reiterate how we've worked very closely at a national level with Arts Council England, the Let's Create strategy. We've had representatives from Arts Council England working with us along this journey for the whole year, and the plan is that they will look to endorse this strategy and create a foreword about the strategy for us as well, but also looking at levelling up and the DCMS creative industries sector vision. We've looked working with the regional partners as well very closely, and a large amount of local activity. So things that we across the whole of the council are doing in terms of our priorities, in terms of our council plan, in terms of our various different strategies, but also those of our partners and our bodies beyond the council. And a lot of that, those independencies has very much informed thinking of some of those themes and priorities that Emmeline and I have highlighted already, and have very much informed a lot of the thinking around the action plan that is being developed to actually bring the strategy to life.
Okay, my turn now. So the longer term plan, I mean, we've talked a lot about collaboration, and it is now really clearly acknowledged that whilst local authorities are the main funders of culture, and at a time when, you know, our funding and funding of other local councils is being cut and some councils are failing, it means that the sector is really, really fragile, and, you know, we could lose all sorts of organisations and creativity as a result of that lack of funding. So it's really acknowledged by our stakeholder group that although it's great that the council has actually put in the time and effort to actually produce the strategy, we cannot as a council be relied upon to actually deliver the aims, and that has to be we have to get buy-in from those stakeholders, and it's quite clear that they are bought into this and they feel very much a part of it and want to see the work going forward. That, you know, they recognise that they need to actually step up and help us make this strategy work. So I'm really pleased to say that there's a real commitment on some of our stakeholders, or many of our stakeholders, to do that. I think we've built a really, really good group of organisations. We've got to know them really well, and they've got to know us really well too. So I think it's really important that we have that relationship now, and we can then go forward and really see some change in what we can offer culturally throughout our district. I think the next step, if we could go on to the well, the key actions, obviously working together, that really is you know, hugely important, because as I've said, although we've put a lot of time and effort into producing the strategy, we can't be the ones who are expected to deliver on all of these actions. We need to champion what we've got already. You know, we have a fantastic festivals programme. We have a growing creative sector, and we have lots of very, very small businesses that we know would like to come and start up, and we need to make space for them and allow that to happen. And obviously the last thing is knowledge. It's really important that we share the information that we have between all of these organisations, so that we're not duplicating anything. And that and one of the actions that really came forward in our discussions at the stakeholder meetings was, you know, creating some sort of creative hub. For instance, Portsmouth Creates was an example that came up on a number of occasions. And if you go onto their website, it's exciting and it's vibrant and it's buzzing and all the things that we would really love to see for our district too. So move on to the next steps. So what we'd like to hear is feedback from you tonight on this presentation and the strategy. The next step is that the strategy will be considered for adoption at Cabinet on the 14th of March. And then following that, obviously, there's still a lot of work to be done because we will need to develop proper action plans over all those themes and priorities, and then make sure that we can deliver on the actions by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I particularly like those themes. I think that's how we measure success, if you like, to the degree to which we meet those themes and deliver on those themes. I did wonder if you looked at the current activity against those themes and indeed the geographical distribution, because there is a perception that it's Winchester centric, the cultural offer. Well, that's where most people live. But have you assessed how that is spread around the district?
I'll start, but Emmeline will definitely feed in there. Certainly during through the work that Emmeline and the team were doing throughout the evidence base, a whole range of mapping was done across the whole district, so we could clearly see. You're absolutely right, Councillor Pat. A lot does happen in the city, but equally a lot does happen across the district as well. So we've looked at what is happening, how it's happening, the nature of what is happening, etc. We've also looked at other areas and seen how that has sort of related to what we're doing. It also helps us to see where the gaps are, where the challenges are in terms of geographically and where things can happen. A lot of that has sort of informed a lot of the thinking around the actions as well. But Emmeline, I don't know if you want me to add to that.
Yeah, and I think it depends what we're talking about specifically. Sort of events and festivals, yes, a lot of the events and festivals happen in the city centre, but if we're talking creative industries, that geographic spread is completely different. The amount of architects we've got across the district is a little bit mind-blowing, but there are reasons sometimes for those things, and a festival in the city centre makes sense in terms of our transport links. So then there are, if we wanted to diversify that, there are challenges that you will need to overcome in order to be able to do that. So that's all part and parcel of it, is how can we increase that geographic spread as and where it's needed.
And also, can I just add also to, and that evidence base creates our baseline data, or has created our baseline data. So we'll be able to then, as the strategy progresses, compare against that baseline data each year to see sort of how we're moving forward in terms of measuring and monitoring.
Thank you. I think it would be really useful if you could, I think of it as celebrating difference. And that's why we want a broad cultural offering. And I think if we could find a way of communicating to groups that are active across the district what's going on elsewhere, and then thinking, I can do that. We could do that here with a slight local twist on it. Obviously, I think it would be very successful. Thank you.
That's horrible.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points of clarity. I like the inclusion and diversity theme, but when I look at your sort of partnerships, and I appreciate this may only be a top level, I don't necessarily see a breadth of organisations. So just conscious, have you talked more broadly to be able to enable this theme as thoroughly as possible? And also in the same chart on partnerships, we talk about the tertiary sort of sector in terms of the universities and the like, but obviously the educational sector is much broader than that, and just wanting to make sure that we've had that input again to support the overall strategy on the education approach. And then the other question, Chair, I have, which is, I sort of missed slightly in the document scale, as it were. We talk about breadth and we talk about diversity, but we have some enormous activities, and I mean, Boomtown being a good example, for example, huge and growing, and some love it, some not so much. But what are we doing in terms of the sort of, are we helping bigger to get bigger? And how does that sort of sit? Something of that nature, which is a very, in a particular part of this. And also growth in the economy. How are we growing bigger? So architects partnerships, fantastic. But, you know, if we had the sort of Google equivalent turning up on our doorstep, how would we deal with them in terms of bringing them that creativity to, you know, our district? Are we ready for that? Are we encouraging that? What's our approach? So have we just sort of sidestepped the big slightly on some of these, or are we out there looking as much at that encouragement as perhaps the broader elements you've articulated? Thank you.
I'll certainly start off with the stakeholder one. So in terms of the stakeholder group, we've developed that fairly organically as a representative, as representative group as we could. It is not inclusive in any way. Emmeline has engaged through one-to-one sessions and workshop sessions with a much broader group of that, and that does sort of fit the inclusivity and diversity element. You highlight about education. Yes, we've got very clearly the further and higher education. We're working very hard with Hampshire County Council in terms of the primary and secondary education sector. The other thing that I will say is that this was an initial group to get us on the journey. It's not the final group by any stretch of the imagination. One of the next pieces of work for us and for the group will be to review and strengthen the governance, the transparency, and how and what sort of group that might be going forward. As Councillor Thompson said, could it be like Portsmouth Creates, for example? Could it be a cultural compact? Or anything in between, and so we're obviously exploring all of those options to ensure that that correct group, that correct sort of board and group of people are the ones that can make sure that it is fully transparent, fully diverse and fully broad across all of the aims and objectives of the strategy.
Councillor Miller.
I'm surprised looking at the events and festivals that you've only got 30. I can think of dozens of events that go all across the district with large numbers of people there, agricultural shows, garden shows, where there's lots of stands for all sorts of organisations, cultural shows. I think you're selling yourself short of what the district does. There are dozens of things, church fates where lots of people are allowed to promote their activities, music groups, dance groups. I think whilst you may have the right strategy going forward for big events, I think you're actually underselling what was already out there in many of the villages. I'm sure also have lots of events going on, lots of beer festivals, which you might not count, agriculture shows, ploughing shows, garden shows, all sorts of things that are events with a lot of people there. And they are, you know, cultural and explain how life went. And I think we're selling ourselves short of what the district actually provides. So it's not really a question, it's more a comment, I think. But I think we should include those sort of things in these sort of reports.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. There was a previous report from the team on festivals and events that did come to this committee, and I think some of the comments you were making there were represented quite strongly there in at that meeting, and in terms of the feedback on the district nature, and to make sure that the that paper then sort of covered that wider involvement of other organisations. But thank you for reminding us of that. Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. No, it's all right. I was just going to come in on that because actually the members' briefing we held, and I think you were there, or it may have been when we sat down at this committee last time and talked about those other events, and certainly I do remember that Emmeline asked if, you know, if we've missed any important events out, please let us know. And in fact, there was an interactive map, I think, that Emmeline sent out some months ago for us to all contribute to if things weren't happening and or weren't on the map and they needed to be. So I think we did cover quite a lot of that aspect. I was going to say, in terms of Councillor Horrell's point about scale, which is a very interesting one, and from my point of view around festivals and events, I was thinking more about how, if we've got a festival coming up, what could be bolted on to that festival that might appeal for a slightly different group of people who wouldn't necessarily come to the main festival but might be interested in some aspect of it. It's just and therefore you grow, you know, rather than a festival being 1 or 2 days, maybe it's 3 or 4 days, or it takes place somewhere else. Well, I'm not. Yes, I'm not talking about Boomtown, but I'm talking about, you know, the smaller festivals that we have, and the possibility of being able to sort of run other events that would complement it, but would appeal to a different set of a different audience.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that, and then the opportunity in terms of scale. Also, just continuing on that sort of theme, is where we have key events and festivals happening in specific geographic areas of the district, and where we can actually work with partners across the district that may have sort of sub-elements of those festivals that happen geographically. So that's spreading the economic benefits, spreading the community and cultural benefits more widely. So that's sort of stretching the scale as well. And I think it's also important when we look at a cultural offer, is that we have a range of scales. So we've got the big key iconic things that happen within the district, things like Boomtown, but then we've got the other end of the scale as well, and that was picking up what Councillor Miller was saying, that sort of diverse range of the smaller events too. So I think, you know, we're not saying we're doing one or the other, it's getting the balance across all of those.
Thank you. Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. The next steps obviously alludes to the forum being set up after consideration by Cabinet. It's quite interesting. In talking through this, it's clear that there's an element of uncertainty from a budget perspective as to what sits alongside this. The time scale of the change is quite wide out to 2030, and as we've just discussed, there's a broad group of stakeholders there in the potential mix. So what discussion or consideration is there been given to what defines success for that forum? You know, what are the indicators, the measures then in getting that cohort together then that will say, yeah, we're heading in the right direction on all fronts?
So in terms of sort of the KPIs that we'll be looking around in terms of that cohort and that group of people that would be coming together, would be you know, looking at sort of the role and the effectiveness of those individual organisations and the breadth and the strength that those organisations have in working together, and their strategic ability in their strategic context. That will be very important. So that will then enable that group to be putting joint funding bids together. So that will be another measure, sort of, you know, how is that group actually looking at how it's going to bring in financial investment going forward. Another part of that group will be around sort of the PR activity and how are we actually presenting ourselves as a district to attract funding and also to attract new events and festivals and our wider cultural offer. So it'll be a mix of those sorts of things that we will be looking at, but that will be a piece, that will be part of the governance piece of work that we'll be developing over the next year. That's a key part, it's a key action in the first year action plan, to be forming a little bit more around that, because it's absolutely really important that we get the right group that can actually bring forward the actual strategy and the actual actions and influence the direction. But it's also really important we've got a whole set of KPIs that we can very clearly measure where we are and where we're trying to get to and where we are in the journey going forward on that.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say that now I've seen this presentation, I understand more about the cultural strategy. And I think, Emily, if you could send out that request for events again, I would understand better what you're asking for. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can I come back to Councillor Showman's question in terms of the, I suppose that forum? Is there going to be a formal constitution for that group, and how will the governance process actually work? Given as we've identified that the district is a quite wide-ranging, sort of element, and we have obviously specific and large groupings in Winchester itself within the city, which then have very different needs to those out in the rest of the district, which more rural or sort of more have a different focus in terms of the events and the type of culture that's being brought. How would you see that forum managing to span all of that? And is it then, as I say, going to have a formal constitution which actually can have KPIs and sort of actions attributed to it? Thank you.
I think the easiest answer to that is, at this moment, we don't know. Only because that, as I said earlier, that is a key part of an action for the first year, to developing all of that governance structure, to make sure that it does, that we recognise the challenges of the district-wide breadth and depth of what is offered and how that works collectively and what those KPIs might be. So we as officers have got very clear sort of views on where we think that might look like, but equally, because this is such a partnership and collaboratively driven piece of work, and we are one of the many partners in making all of this happen, is that that's sort of a piece of work that the group together have got to do. The level of constitution, the light touch versus heavily constituted, that is all up for discussion as well, and it will also depend on what sort of definite role that group has. So, for example, if it is going for particular funding applications, it may have to be constituted to be a recipient of that. So it's all of those complexities that we need to give thought to over the coming months.
Yes, I was thinking beyond not only the actual bidding for, but the actual distribution of any funds that might then come that way, because without a set, sort of idea of how that is going to be distributed, funds that come in might then end up, not being allocated, because there is then internal wrangling as to who's actually then the main, beneficiary of those. So I'm just anticipating that, there's quite a diverse mix of organisations, and that, some form of mechanism for working your way through that is going to be needed. To achieve the objectives that you're obviously putting in this paper.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, yes, as Andrew said, a lot of this has still got to be buttoned down. I mean, where we've got to at the moment is very much producing the strategy and getting agreement around the priorities and the themes and the vision from the stakeholder group. But I know we're already in discussions with a number of those stakeholders to take this forward on a more sort of firm footing, let's say. Yes, it's all got to be worked out and gone through the mix, really. But we'll be able to get a bit more. I mean, not in terms of governance, I suspect, by the cabinet paper, but obviously you'll be able to see the strategy as a whole when the cabinet papers are produced.
Great, thank you very much. Members, any debate items? One final one. Onto this 8 o'clock now.
Chair, given this is the last piece of scrutiny for this document pre the cabinet decision, and so the policy committee is acting in its full scrutiny role here. I do think the question we might need to ask the administration to think about what goes into the cabinet paper in terms of that sort of ongoing review, given we haven't seen that governance piece tonight. How are we going to make this work effectively, particularly if it's going to be grant receiving, etc. And I think it would be appropriate to acknowledge that in the cabinet paper and have a step to sort of deal with that going forward. Just at least acknowledging that element hasn't been decided yet, has to evolve, so that we're all reassured that we'll come back to look at that and understand how we go forward. Just a thought, Chair, to make it go more smoothly as it goes through the next stage of decision making. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Thank you, and thank you for the questions. And any debate on this particular paper, Councillor Ashwell?
It's a good starting point for the future development to 2030. What my concerns and already have voiced are the governance of this forum that we're going to put together, and you have time to deliver that. I'm sure the next year or so we'll find that, but writing down the KPIs are equally important, because the wish list is there and it's fantastic. I agree with every one of them. How much did we achieve? That I think needs to come out from your governance. As far as the paper is concerned, in terms of the vision, I don't have any disagreement. That's how we want to be. We want to be inclusive. We want to have health and well-being. We want to have increased events and all that. I fully agree. Is the next step of managing it, getting the stakeholders involved and interested, because long-term getting people involved and committed to it is a challenge. And how do we do that? I don't know yet. I'm sure you don't know either. But so you probably have more thoughts on it than me. But I would happily support the paper as it stands today. Thank you.
Any further debate? No? Okay. Right. Well, I'd just like to say thank you very much. It's a wide-ranging report, and I think the energy and enthusiasm that Emily has put into it, I know from the comments we've had in terms of the members briefing, and I think you've used that same approach to consult very widely, and the report is sort of gives us a lot of hope for the future in terms of the cultural strategy that Winchester City Council will be developing in conjunction with our partners. I think in terms of the meeting, we were just wanting to make sure that it's a strategy that's covering the whole of the district, and that the scope and the scale of some of the activities are compatible with each other. And the governance and the sort of mechanisms by which the overall forum will be working, we feel that needs to be sort of brought out, as you say, quickly in that process, and that there's then an ongoing review required to ensure that we are going to be achieving those objectives. But thank you both. Thank you all very much for bringing the paper to the committee. And just now go back to the recommendation. The recommendation is the policy committee is asked to review and comment on the direction of the strategy, including the vision, values, themes and priorities. Do we agree that's been done? Great. Thank you all very much. I am conscious that this is going to be quite a long meeting. Is there any requirement for a short break? Could I ask for just 2 or 3 minutes for people to go? So if we can get back at 8:10, please. 8:10, just a very quick break. Thank you all very much, and we'll reconvene and recommence the meeting and move on to the next item, item 8 on the agenda, which is the Green Economic Development Strategy Action Plan 2024-27. And I'll call upon Councillor Thompson again to introduce this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Members of this committee should be well versed in the GEDS, the Green Economic Development Strategy, as it has been considered by this very committee on many occasions before being adopted and agreed by Cabinet in October 21. The strategy provides a framework and direction to influence the development of the district's economy over the next 10 years, enabling the Council's commitment to being carbon neutral by 2030. Our council plan says that in order to create a vibrant local economy, we need to grasp every opportunity for green growth. This strategy identifies these opportunities and sets out actions that we as a council, together with our partners, can take to enable green growth across our district. Following adoption of the strategy back in 2021, a detailed 2-year action plan was produced. This comes to an end in March this year, so it is time to take a look at what has been achieved over those 2 years, and it is also timely to take a look at what has changed since the adoption of GEDS. For example, the continuing effects of the pandemic. We've now got a number of wars taking place, both in the Ukraine and Gaza, and we've had rampant inflation and the cost of living crisis. All of these events have had an effect on how GEDS can be delivered, but the themes of the original strategy remain the same, even though the context has changed. So it's really important that this strategy and the operational plans that come with it remain agile. It is vital that this action plan connects into and works across other key council strategies, and as set out on page 65, and in particular, the need for GEDS and the CNAP to be closely aligned. A review of the governance around GEDS is also needed to ensure that this happens, and it has been reviewed, and it is proposed that a Winchester District Climate and Green Economy Partners Forum will be developed with a new set of terms of reference, which you can see at Appendix 1. I will stop here and welcome any questions or comments from members of the committee, unless Mr. Costello has anything further to add.
That's fine. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Before we move into questions, I'd like to call Councillor Wallace forward to make a presentation or representation on this particular item. And Councillor Wallace, I'm sure you're aware, but you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to see the Green Economic Development Strategy that's before us today, and particularly pleased to see that green aims run throughout the strategy. However, whilst I applaud the intent, I do have some practical concerns about the content. Firstly, on the links to the council strategies, I was struggling to find how this strategy linked to the council plan or the carbon neutrality action plan. The CNAP has actions such as promote hybrid working to reduce carbon emissions from commuting and install 8 megawatts of rooftop solar PV on commercial properties across Winchester District. I couldn't find these in the Green Economic Development Strategy. Conversely, there are aims in the strategy that don't appear in the other council strategies. For example, deliver urban heat mitigation measures and coordinate local food producers and landowners to enhance biodiversity. It's great to be thinking green, but I'm confused as to how this all links together and therefore delivers on the council's commitments. On governance, I have 2 points. Firstly, regarding the Climate and Green Economy Partners Forum. Yeah, it's great to see this being set up, but per the council plan, this council is committed to working collaboratively, working with others to get the best results. To that end, may I suggest that cross-party representatives are invited to join the forum. Secondly, on the Carbon Neutrality Action Board, the Carbon Board is frequently referenced both in briefings to members and in council reports. Appendix 1 states that the purpose of the Carbon Board is to provide managerial and operational oversight and guidance to the council's carbon neutrality programme delivery. Per my layman's understanding, if the board provides oversight of a critical council policy, the minutes from this meeting constitute material relating to business transacted at a public meeting should be made available to members. I've requested these previously, but the monitoring officer left the council before providing a response. Given the expanded role of this board, please can you advise if meetings will be held in public and/or will the minutes be available to members? Finally, on the action plan, again, lots of great intentions, but it is really difficult to understand who's committed to delivering what. For example, we've got actions in here that are the responsibility of Hampshire County Council, other actions that are the responsibility of the Winchester Housing Team, not the economy team, and other examples where a single delivery mechanism is being used to address multiple actions. It's very confusing to determine what commitments the council's making. In the strategy document, in my previous life in industry, I'm used to seeing SMART goals and objectives. By that I mean specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and time-bound goals and objectives. Unfortunately, having read this document, I'm none the wiser as to what is actually being committed to, by whom and over what time period. As is stated in the report, the council has the target of reaching net zero across the district by 2030. The council does not have unlimited resources, and it's therefore imperative that we use the resources that are available in the most efficient ways possible to achieve our aims. It'd be great if this report could be revisited to provide SMART goals and objectives so that we can clearly understand what we're aiming to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Thompson, do you want to make any responses to Councillor Wallace, or should we just move into questions from members?
I was wondering whether either Mrs. Robbins or Mr. Costello might comment on those points raised.
I'll take some, and then perhaps that others might be appropriate for Andrew to respond to. The Partners Forum is a new group that we are looking to bring together because of the overlap that we saw between a number of the organisations that work across the district that are involved and interested in both the economy and the carbon neutrality activity. So the reason for bringing those together, it's very much an outward engagement forum that we're proposing, and we can happily review what the member involvement is within that forum. It's meant to be an inclusive and open and flexible approach. We were trying not to be overly prescriptive about it so that people could come and go as topics relating to their areas of interest warranted their attendance. So I'm sure we can pick that up and look at that with regard to member participation in that forum. With regard to the board minutes, that is an internal officer meeting that members are invited to. I would have to speak with the current monitoring officer, but there would be no intention, as my understanding is, to hold that in public. They are conversations where we debate and talk about things that are very early in their gestation, and so wouldn't be appropriate necessarily for public debate. But I will take that point up. If you didn't get an answer to your previous question, I will make sure that we do follow that up. So I think they're the sort of key points on the partner forum and access to the different groups. I think, I don't know if you want to comment anything on the sort of layout and information in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of, yeah, we take on board your points about sort of the cohesion and how it sort of lays out and reflects. I mean, it is aimed to be time bound in that this particular action plan is a 3-year action plan. So the actual action plan shows the stage and then the phasing of the work within that. So the action plan that has just come to an end, that clearly sort of stated where the stage were of various different actions, and then some of those actions have moved put forward into this actual programme. And then again, they have been staged accordingly. So of, I think, the original 38 actions that were in the Green Economic Development Strategy, now the vast majority are to some degree being actioned upon. Yes, this is not an economic development team strategy by any stretch of the imagination. This is a strategy that is across all of the council and is a strand of so many of council's different work. So within this action plan, we've clearly laid it out in terms of lead teams. So there are specific actions that are being led by the economy team, specific actions being led by the sustainability team, specific actions being led by the housing team, the transport team, etc. And we work as an economy team to bring those strands together and to monitor and to evaluate where that work actually is at any particular time. And the programme board will have a scrutiny of that progress. Also take on board your points that you make in terms of the connectivity between the council plan, the carbon neutrality action plan, and this GEDS action plan. There is certainly, we've worked hard to sort of bring that all together. It is very complex. And so there are actions, for example, such as around solar, as you say, within the carbon neutrality action plan, that is actually within this actual piece of work. And there's particular work around being delivered through the Rural England Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund that enables that. So we've sort of worked to sort of find those connections the best way that we can. But we sort of will sort of give further thought to those areas.
Thank you. Members, any questions? Councillor Miller.
Yeah, there's a graph on page 90 about the percentage of houses that are energy efficient in the district. Now, I can't quite work out how anybody knows the houses that are energy efficient when they haven't changed hands for 20 or 30 years. I mean, take the close I live in, there are 18 houses, 12 which haven't changed hands since the EPC's come in. So how does anybody know how energy efficient they are? I just think that it's almost a meaningless graph that doesn't tell us anything useful, and I can't see why we used it.
The graph is actually from national data from the government, so I would have to look at their metrics and methodologies for how they calculate that, but we use government information and data where possible, because we know that that is validated and consistent, and it is referenced also in the I believe it's referenced in the CNAP as well. So this is about showing trends and showing change rather than being absolutely specific on a project level KPI or anything like that. So I think this is about showing that there is data out there that we can monitor over time to assess change, but it is government data.
Thank you.
Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. I have some sympathy with Councillor Wallace's points. However, when the delivery mechanisms are in so many cases outside the direct control of the council, it is difficult to quantify. However, I do think these papers would benefit from some indicators. They are indicators, and that's the problem with the energy ratings of houses. They are no more than indicators. I would like, you have three that came out to me from the report as being useful indicators, page 80, page 84 and page 91, the EPCs, Councillor Miller. And it would have been useful to compare those and see the change between 2021 and now. We are 3 years into the GEDS. However, some of those indicators have no more recent data than 2021. So maybe we need to find some data which is monitored in a more regular fashion so that we can see what the change is, because that's what it comes down to. If we're doing a good job, a change has happened in the right direction. and I think we would benefit from that. I'm also very interested in how you're going to resolve the tension between biodiversity and food security, which of course is a very hot topic at the moment. I have a load of regen farms and of course leaf exemplar farms in my ward, and I know that they are seeing the benefits of a less interventions, but I would like to know how you're going to spread that experience across the food production sector in our district, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Councillor Horrell?
Chair, thank you. I think this builds on one of the points that Councillor Power made, which is that some of the elements in here we're absolutely not in control of. One of the areas that I am particularly aligned to is some of the lack of infrastructure in our district, electricity, basics of wastewater, all sorts, and we're simply not aligned with the utility companies providing those services, and do not have the right resources in many places to achieve some very admirable objectives. Is it right to put those elements into here, given we already know some of the difficulties we have practically in making this work, even on our current setup in the district? Or is this aspirational because you have some magic wand that you think you can wave with them that we haven't been able to achieve so far? Thank you.
If I may, can I answer Councillor
Yes, sorry,
question?
My apologies. It was my fault for not allowing you.
And then we'll come straight to that, Councillor Horrell. I think it's interesting about the tensions between biodiversity and, as you say, the agricultural sector. We know that there is a lot of work through our various activities on the natural environment team side that are looking at that. We've got projects with our South Downs National Park and the farm clusters. So I think there is tensions, but I think if we work together, we will need to explore those and understand the implications of them. I think some of the high level long term change that might be needed or proposed within the green economic strategy, in a way what we've tried to do is take small parts of that and how can we move towards that very long term big change that might be needed. So I think we recognise those tensions, but we also recognise that there are different strands of the council working on elements of that. And I guess maybe some of that connection, going back to the point that some of those connections haven't come through really clearly. So we'll do that. So a bit of a long-winded answer that, we do recognise that there are opportunities to spread those benefits through some of the networks that we're working with. Thank you.
I think, Councillor Horrell, I think we're very aware that this particular piece of work and this particular piece of strategy, we are not in control of all of the elements of, and I think we're very cognizant of that fact. I think this is born out of the original Green Economic Development Strategy that set a lot of those parameters, a lot of those particular objectives, and a lot of those particular measures. So, from a point of sort of view of consistency and trend, we have maintained those, but we recognise that we don't have the control over all of those. So, at the minute, they are there, and we are watching. We have a watching brief over of them, and I think we have to be realistic of what we can achieve as a council and our stakeholders. In terms of also what our partners and wider organisations are doing. And I think keeping that trend is important, but also recognising there's going to need to be some flexibility within the actual outputs and outcomes that are actually realistic and are within our control.
Councillor Ashwell.
Thank you, Chair. I understand from page 73, you had a schematic presentation diagram of the governance. I see that Economy and Housing Policy Committee have an overarching responsibility for the two forums we are going to set up, the Winchester District Climate and Green Economic Partners, and the other one is Green Economic Development Strategy. Now, as I see it from the details, we are not looking for any representation from the Winchester City Council into these small forums. Is it because of resource limitation, or is it the intention that they should not have any WCC representation?
If it looks like we shouldn't be involved in that partnership, then that is an oversight, because we should be involved. That is one that we would be leading, facilitating, enabling to happen. So yes, we would expect to have council representation on that. Absolutely.
Councillor Miller.
If we're going to have a green development strategy, should we not also link it to our local plan and say that we won't build houses out in districts? We put lots of houses out in the district and no jobs out there, because most of our local plans for villages have got no employment sites at all. And if you want to cut down carbon, you don't have lots of houses in the countryside and no jobs. And I think we've got to look hard at where we're going to provide the jobs for those people if you're going to put the houses out there, if you're serious about green development and cutting CO2 emissions.
And certainly when the Green Economic Development Strategy was actually formed and developed, similar to what you've just heard about the cultural strategy, a whole piece of work around interdependencies and linkages across all of the strategies across the council was formed and developed. So understanding of the local plan, how the local plan can actually inform the delivery of some of the objectives and aspirations of the Green Economic Strategy was borne out through that process, and equally how the Green Economic Development Strategy could inform the local plan going forward. And that continual discussion between officers in those two areas of work continues to this day. So it's not something, we're very aware of those synergies and those connections in terms of delivery and effectiveness.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you. Chairman, I have to challenge that statement of Councillor Miller's. Our local plan was based on work done in the parishes to do with infrastructure, and I was a member of the Parish Infrastructure Working Group. We identified the need as part of that work, the need for modern business premises, and therefore we recognised the need for jobs locally, given that we had to provide, I think it was 500 houses at the time. And I'm a little concerned that other parishes did not do this work to promote employment opportunities. And I wondered if, I think we probably have the wrong people here to answer that question, but did other parishes not do that work to identify employment opportunities? Because we certainly did as a hub town. Thank you.
Well, I think first of all, yes, you have got the wrong people here to answer that particular question. I would be surprised if they didn't, because of course the local plan is all very much based around our sort of 20-minute communities, and therefore the need to have both employment land and housing and other facilities and infrastructure. It all goes together. But I don't know, I'm afraid.
I think, as we're saying, I think we're surmising in terms of that. So I think, though Councillor Miller, it's a relevant question, I don't think the relevant people are here to respond to it. So thank you very much for that. Any further questions? Councillor Horrell, make the last one, and then I'm going to debate.
Chair, thank you. On the forum, there are a few gaps in the business part of the wheel. There were some noticeable organisations missing. I don't know whether that's because you haven't gained sort of commitment from them to be involved, like the Hampshire Chamber of Commerce, for example, who would be sort of a useful addition. It'd be good to understand whether you've got other conversations going on to add to that. Obviously the lepers disappearing, but you know there'll be a strand in the county's work that specifically links back to the business piece. So just one point of clarification on the detail on the chart in the report. And then I suppose the other question, Chair, which I'm not sure I feel that we've had complete clarity on. In other parts of our work, and tonight in housing, we talked about that broader partnership and everyone working together and that openness. Whereas in this part, and Councillor Wallace made the point much more eloquently than me, it feels very closed, that people are not included. There's not an open discussion about some of this. And I just wonder whether we can encourage those driving some of this work to have that more open dialogue with the broader councillor audience who are interested in trying to find good solutions for the entire district. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The wheel with the partners, I think there's been some error in the way that it's been copied through, because I can see that there's some boxes missing, and Hampshire Chamber of Commerce is very much in there, and there's others in there, and so we will correct that. They absolutely they should be there, and we've picked some of the agencies. We know that there will be others. The wheel was getting quite big, and as I say, with this forum, this is very much about the opportunity for people to come and go. I don't want it to be seen as a very fixed sort of forum. It's meant to be open and inclusive, and that is where we will have those conversations and debate in public. I think the programme board that people are talking about is our internal mechanism as a team to report on what's happening. So I think the forum here and others that we might set up around project activity is very much a public facing one, and the programme board is something of sort of like an internal governance for us, which is not meant to be secret, but that's just us working through our programme delivery and reporting and knowing that as a team there is governance around how we are looking at the progress of the action plan. So I think that's the distinction between the two, and so there will very much be the opportunity to talk publicly about what's happening in the strategy, engage businesses and others in that green economic development activity and the delivery of actions and initiatives and so on.
Chair, could I just ask one very quick supplementary to that, which is helpful, Mrs. Robbins' reply. So you have parish and town councils on your wheel, but you don't have your own councillors on the wheel. So in the spirit of what you've just said, that might be a very useful addition in that forum context, if that is the place for that broader involvement. Just a suggestion, Chair. Thank you.
And thank you. I'll correct that. I can see a big space in the middle where we can perhaps sit.
Right, I think that with time moving on is the questions. If there's any debate on this particular item. Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. Could we please recommend that the indicators are reviewed so that we can look at them actually being collected over a period of time, so we can demonstrate progress or indeed regress, and recognise that so many of these are out of our control. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Councillor Power, that was going to be an element of my summation, so thank you for that. Any further debate? No? Okay. Like to just thank again the team for bringing the Green Economic Development Strategy and the action plan for the next 4 years through to this committee. In terms of reviewing it, as was just mentioned by Councillor Power, I think we have to acknowledge that this is an attempt to bring together a very large range of underlying policy and other documentation that has an impact on the green economic development of the district, and in that it's a commendable presentation in terms of actually how wide-ranging all of the activities that not only us as a council are involved in, but also the many partners that we are engaging with to bring this strategy together. I think that leads to then some of the confusion that may have been identified and some of the areas where people would like to have a bit of clarity. And I think in terms of those indicators, I think what we're looking for is obviously those generic ones which actually show us how the whole policy is proceeding, but some of those more narrow ones, which actually are the areas where we as a council have a direct ability to impact it, and therefore we can actually monitor our own progress more readily than with the wide range of action plan that is presented here this evening. So I think in asking you to go back and review this, it's to look at the policy, look at the strategy as to and keep in all of those more wide-ranging and interactions with our partners, and making sure that we've got all of those in the paper itself. But then to look at some KPIs which, as Winchester City Council, we can then be said to be responsible for, and we can actually then measure our own progress within the wider concept of the actual action plan for the whole green economic development strategy. So I think that in summary is my sort of from the conversation and the questions we've had of feedback to you. But I think it's, as I say, a demonstration of the wide-ranging nature of the green economic development strategy, and the fact that we do have so many partners, so many other aspects that are impinging upon that. So it's a very complex, sort of model indeed. But thank you for trying to bring that to us, and sort of putting it to us in terms of the way you've done this evening. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much, and we move on to our okay, great, thank you. We move on to our final paper of the evening. This is item 9 on the agenda, and it is a scoping document for the older persons accommodation strategy initial thoughts. Call upon Councillor Westwood to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you. I am between all of you and going home. Just reminding you. Stops and facts. There are almost 11 million people aged 65 and over in the UK, which is 19% of the population. And in 2021, 3.3 million of these people aged 65 and over were living alone in England and Wales. Nearly 65% of those aged 70 reported being in good health. By aged 80, that number reduces to less than 50%, and by age 90, less than 30% reported being in good health. As well as an increase in the amount of ill health, population ageing will mean greater prevalence of age-related concerns, including mental health conditions such as dementia. An often overlooked factor is loneliness, as families are more likely to be more geographically spread than in the past, leaving older people without local family support. We have a well-reported social care crisis in this country, and virtually every family is experiencing the anxiety of looking after more elderly members of their family. So what needs to happen? This is a complex problem that needs to be dealt with at national and local level, and we're all very aware of the financial strain being placed on Hampshire County Council when meeting the needs of adult social care. Winchester District is not immune from these national trends, and this is a timely point for us to review the impact of an ageing population in our district, and how we specifically within this strategy, how we meet the accommodation needs and aspirations of older persons in the district of Winchester across all tenures. We're outlining an approach in this paper to understand what is needed for the future. And I'll hand over at that point to Mrs. Thorburn, who'll take them through some of the detail.
Thank you, Councillor Westwood. I think for the purpose of this review, older persons does actually refer to anybody over the age of 55. And the council, in light of what Councillor Westwood has just outlined, we need to respond to the change in accommodation needs for older persons. The council last did a full assessment back in 2015, and since that date we've reviewed it, but it's been reviewed as part of other strategies such as the housing strategy, and we've also seen such a significant change not only in policy but in actually what older people want and what their aspirations are. I think it's really important to note that when we talk about older persons accommodation, inherently we think about council accommodation or retirement homes and registered prices, but it's a broad spectrum from owner occupiers to people living in HMOs. So I think it's really important to note that. From 2.6 in the paper, we look at local demographic data, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there because you have sight of it. What I wanted to do though is just pull out a few figures from those that are on our housing register. Now I do appreciate that there are lots of older person in housing need that might not be on our register for lots of different reasons. And part of our review in doing the strategy is to explore that. But what I wanted to just highlight, of half the people over 55 on the housing register already live in a secure council or registered provided accommodation or in private tenancy. So 111 of our applicants on Hampshire Home Choice of 55 plus are actually in some of the most insecure housing, and that also then means that maybe we can't adapt it as their needs change. So the paper then goes on to talk about the national policy context and then also the local policy context. And I think really this is a very important document, but it's an inordinate amount of work to get to where we need to be, and there's lots of areas that we need to review. But we need to be really certain that we try and meet the accommodation needs and aspirations of older persons in the district of Winchester across all tenures. There has to be sufficient and affordable and appropriate accommodation in the right place at the right time for older persons. And that the provision available is future-proofed in line with the 10 happy principles. And I did put a link there. My IT skills failed me when I tried to download the link and put it in the report, so I do apologise for that. We also make sure that the accommodation for older persons in this district is fit for purpose and actually delivers choice as our residents get older. It also addresses the accommodation issues raised by the older persons when we do our consultation process, but it also is aligned with the priorities of health and adult social care. We also need to review the market, and we also need to review our current policies as we've discussed in earlier papers. There's also an inordinate amount of evidence that we need to go through doing this strategy, and that's listed out in 3.1. And then we also need to engage and consult to gather meaningful information from all our stakeholders and that's Hampshire, that's landlords, that's Hampshire County Council, that's the Disabled Facility Grants team and officers, it's private retirement home providers, it's residents, it's councillors, it's parish councils. It's a really broad spectrum of stakeholders. And we will try and be as broad as we can in our consultation methods and not just limit that to sort of closed questions like questionnaires, but we'll try and have focus groups. We will use our existing forums such as the Registered Providers Forum, Private Landlords Forum, the Homelessness Forum, digital surveys, and we will hopefully after tonight have a really clear consultation plan, because Sarah and I will meet and do the plan for the next steps after tonight. So next steps are outlined in point 5, and point 6 is our other options considered and rejected. And if we don't adopt an older person's accommodation strategy, it won't be in line with good practice, and there are upcoming legislative changes, and we do have an increase in older population in the Winchester district. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we go into questions, there was a question from a member of TACT from Monica Gill, the Vice Chair of TACT. Unfortunately, she was unable to be here, so we've agreed to read her contribution out. So I'm going to do that. Her comment is, I've read the report and in agreement with the recommendations. However, I would like to stress that it is important that a consultation be conducted with older tenants before plans are drawn up. Had this happened before the new fire doors were installed, problems which are now arising with tenants having difficulties getting in and out of their property due to the quickness of the closing mechanism, which does not allow them time, especially those in wheelchairs or have mobility strollers, to enter or leave safely. So that was contributed by Monica Gill. So just put that on record. Thank you, Matthew. I'm not too sure whether there's a need for just to let you know that was what she was going to contribute. Thank you. Open the floor to questions then, if members would like to. Councillor Chamberlain.
Hopefully, just a quick one to get us started. The report obviously details the sort of the demographic split across the district. The consultation, I assume, but I wanted to check, is also going to be across the district. So, thank you.
Councillor Horrell.
Chair, I have more questions than you'll want to take tonight, so I might have to do that with Chris and Mrs. Thorburn on another occasion. But I do think this piece of work is really requiring a very specific data set here for us, because I see some of the numbers on population, but there's a lot more that we need to build around that in the context of where in the district we've got this whole 55, 60, 65 plus dilemma on the data points. We need to understand the Hampshire home choice rules, other providers. We've got perhaps not as much information in here tonight. I think we need to be collecting more about other providers. I think I mentioned St John's tonight as an example, who sit right alongside all the activity, but they're sort of not visible in some of this. So I would encourage you, if I can, question when you're preparing this, to give us a really clear data point on the information so that we can understand that. I also had a question in here about, we talk about extra care and sheltered, but the whole evolution of older persons' care, what good looks like in the future, what are Hampshire saying about what that provision should look like. I know there was a positive move towards extra care when we built Chesil, others have been built that we've worked in partnership with them, but what does that next generation look like? And obviously some of this is for now, but we are working obviously on a longer term framework. So I think understanding that whole backdrop to good provision that we want for our residents is really important. And also one of the things that I think will be really clear, there are lots of sort of words and phrases in here and notes which some of us who are involved pretty closely sort of know and understand, but I do think you want to make sure that it's really clear to everyone about what the definitions are and what we're looking at here. I think it's really would be very helpful to append the references and the more detailed aspects of the Hampshire County Council reports that you've noted in here. There are a couple of them you particularly reference, so that we can read those in combination with what we then will be articulating for our strategy. So just a few thoughts, Chair, but hopefully they're helpful to the team. And thank you for bringing the sort of initial thought process to us so that we can respond to it. Thank you, Chair.
I call you right, Councillor Westwood. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Horrell. That's all very useful information. But what I will do is say there's another dimension to all of this. It's not just about care homes, extra care homes, supported.
You say other facilities like gardens and allotments and common space, really important when you're building new accommodation, if you can include that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you both, and sounds like in agreement that this scope is going to be quite wide, that it's going to be including a lot of things. Sorry, Councillor Power.
Thank you, Chairman. My concern is about the progression of the needs of people, very much related to social isolation. We have cases now where I have people that have been managing very nicely in their own bungalow with their own garden, and then suddenly they can't get out, they get lonely, they want to move into sheltered accommodation. And I think it might be worth looking at the Brendan Care model, and that's particularly strong in Chelmsford, where they have bungalows with little gardens, but they have the shared facilities of a residence lounge and so forth. So if they want to be sociable, they can, or they do jigsaw puzzles. And then they have the truly sheltered accommodation, which is in a flat where care can be brought to them. And on the same premises, they also have a dementia wing and a nursing wing. And that is invaluable, especially when one of the partners has a very specialised health need. They can still be part of that community. And I would like you to go and see Brendan Care at Chandler's Ford and look at that model and form a view as to whether it is deliverable, achievable, because this ageing population is a time bomb, and you are so right to bring that to us now. But there is, and there's the intangibles, what will social care look like in 15 years' time? And so, yes, I'm very happy to recommend that, Chairman. It's a difficult one.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Just a question for myself. In terms of on page 102, you do have the local demographic data, and there just seems to be a significant increase in the population from 65 to 74. Sort of 24.6% increase between 2022 and 2036. Are those just natural progression of the population aging, or are we potentially, sort of having more people coming into the district than of that age? I'm just wondering if there's any information about that within what you have available to you.
Thank you. I think it's a couple of things. The population is aging, but I think also secondly, maybe the younger generation aren't staying in our district, and that's another separate conversation, an issue to have. So they may be moving out to other areas due to affordability, etc. I don't know if Sarah's got anything to add, because Sarah's more the expert than myself, I have to say.
I don't think I do. I think you probably accurately summed it up, to be honest, Karen. Yeah, but I do. I mean, we are facing, as Councillor Westwood set out, that issue across the board, really, and that's reflected in Winchester and District, just like it is everywhere else, really.
Any further questions? Councillor, one last one.
Chair, just a question that we have a moment in time. I know the plan will no sooner have we done one, we'll be on to the next one. But in our planning policies, to make sure that we have the opportunity to meet the needs of this particular cohort of individuals, because very often some of our planning policies don't help us to deliver some of the very important things we've all, I think, collectively agreed we need tonight. And we need to make a particular effort in our plan to ensure that we built that in. Now we're on 18 to 19, but it may be something we need to put a marker down as you do this piece of work in terms of the local plan. Just a thought as we progress, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Westwood.
You're looking at me
I'm
again.
starting to read those eyes.
That's fine. You make a very good point, Councillor Orrell, and the officers were noting duly as you said that. I saw them.
Thank you. If we can then move into debate. Councillor Horrell.
Good luck to the officers. It's a big job, a really important job, and we'll be there along the way with you to help and discuss and contribute to the consultation. Really, really key, because as you've noted, Chair, a very significant part of our population. We need to understand what we need to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. And yes, I think, as you say, it's a very wide-ranging piece of work. Clearly, has been identified not just within council premises, but into residential and private property as well, because obviously the older population will move between, or potentially can move between, those different accommodation types. So it's going to require a wide-ranging and comprehensive look, not just in terms of the types of accommodation, but across the whole of the district. So it's a very necessary, but very time-consuming and difficult piece of work. So we commend you on that. The recommendation for this committee was outlined, and there's quite a large that the policy committee note the report and are asked to provide a particular comment on the proposed and emerging priorities for the older persons accommodation strategy 2024-2029, namely: 1, the supply of housing is sufficient, affordable and appropriate accommodation in the right place at the right time for older people. 2, the district's current provision for all older persons accommodation is fit for purpose and delivers choice for older people across tenures. 3, the accommodation needs and aspirations of older people in the district of Winchester are met. 4, the accommodation issues raised by older persons because of this consultation are addressed. 5, the strategy is aligned with the priorities of health and adult social care to use technology as an enabler, supporting older people to remain living independently for as long as possible. The market is fully reviewed. And finally, the council's current policies relating to the allocation and charges for older persons affordable accommodation are reviewed and revised. So have we covered all of those points and feel that we've actually given the officers food for thought and support? Excellent. Great. Well, thank you all for coming along, and we wish you very well with the work and look forward to you bringing it back to either this or other committees. So thank you very much. Right. And just to finally identify, to go to item 10, which was to note the work programme for February. Actually, that's now next year, isn't it? That'll be next year. And I think, having looked at it, there's actually nothing on the programme at the moment. So we obviously have a full agenda to develop in the next few months. So thank you all for your time this evening, and meeting closed at 9:08. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Chair.